Today with us, we have Mr. Shripad Dharmadhikary. He is an activist and a researcher and the founder coordinator of Manthan Adhyayan Kendra, a center focused on analytical and advocacy work in the water sector. His works aim to shift the water sector in the country towards a more equitable, just, and sustainable path. His areas of water include water policy and programs, river and water resource management, especially using the environment flows approach, dams, hydropower and irrigation, impacts of coal on water and national inland waterways. He is a graduate in mechanical engineer from IIT Bombay and was a full-time activist with the Narmada Bachao Andolan for over 12 years. He completed an online certificate course in environmental flows from the UNESCO IHE DEF in the Netherlands in 2014. He writes extensively on water, rivers, and development issues and is involved in capacity building and training. He was a member of the Government of India's Planning Commission's two working groups in 2010 to 12 for 12th Plan on Urban and Industrial Water Supply and Model Bill for State Water Regulatory System. He was an academic visitor at the Started Assets Program, Smith School of Enterprise and the Environment, University of Oxford, UK, from May 2015 to December 2015. On behalf of the Sitara family, I welcome you, sir, and now we can proceed towards this session. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. It's indeed a pleasure to be with all of you because, with being there on campus many years back, I always have a sense of pleasure to interact with people on the campus. And I really wished that this had been a real meeting, face-to-face meeting. But given the circumstances, of course, I think that what we have is the best possible. So thank you all once again for this opportunity to interact with all of you. And before I start the presentation, I just want to say a couple of words about this presentation that I'm going to make or what I'm going to talk about. My work has largely been around rivers, but of course, rivers being a part of the larger water ecosystem, being a part of the larger water system. We have been also looking at water and water resource management and many of the issues associated with water, be they environmental, developmental, equity, and other issues. So water, we know the state of our rivers and how badly they have been impacted by various things, and often we do understand specific causes. We look at some specific causes that this has happened and that's why this is the state of rivers or this is the state of our water resources. But what I've tried to do in today's presentation is try to bring these many elements together in trying to understand what is our larger outlook or approach towards water. And I believe that it is in understanding this larger mindset or paradigm, whatever you want to call it. There are many words that one can use. I think it is only when we try and understand this whole mindset or approach that we have towards water and water resources that we shall really be able to find a solution as to how to address what we are doing to our water resources. Existing or the dominant paradigm or approach to water. And then I'll talk about what is the possibility of a different and alternative approach to water, which I call an equity, ecology equity centered approach. So this is what I'm trying to lay out here. And because the presentation is slightly longish, if at any point of time, we'll of course have a discussion at the end, and I hope that we'll have substantial time for discussion. But if at any point of time you need some clarifications, please feel free to ask. I don't know what the mechanism for that will be, because when I'm sharing my screen, I don't think I can see the chat or the comments. So maybe one of the organizers can intervene and tell me that this is the question. But we'll take only clarificatory questions. Plus, every few minutes, 5, 7 minutes or 10 minutes, I'll pause and wait for, just sound out if anybody has any clarifications or questions in their mind. And the last thing, because a lot of my work has centered around rivers, what I will be talking about essentially is about rivers. But we'll see that many of the principles or many of the things that I'm trying to talk about are also applicable to water resources in general. So therefore, I will often use this interchangeably, rivers and waters. So I'm going to start the presentation now. I will share my screen and okay, slideshow. Yes. Yeah. Can you see the screen? Can you see the slideshow?
Yes, yes, yes,
Okay,
sir.
thank you. So as I said, I want to talk about a ecology equity. Just 1 second. I think there is a. Yeah. Okay. Sorry, I just had some setting issue. So an ecology equity based perspective for rivers and water is what we want to talk about. Before we do that, let's have a quick look at the state of our rivers. And of course, now this is something which most of you are would be familiar with. Anybody who just walks out or has seen any river in India knows these things, but I think it's good to remind ourselves of it. So let me start with this little picture. And often when we are in a offline class, then I ask people to identify what this is, but I think the online medium doesn't give us those kind of luxuries. So I'll just tell you that this picture, which obviously is a river, is the picture of the Shipra River in the city of Ujjain. And remember that this is the city, this is the place where one of the Mahakumbh or one of the four Ardha Kumbhs is held. The Simhasta Mela, as it is called, where lakhs and lakhs of people come to take a dip in the river. And this is the state of the Shipra. This is the real state of the Shipra River. During the Kumbh itself, they release water from somewhere, but this is the state of the river. We call it a river, but there is no water at all in the river. This is a picture of the Mutha River in the city of Pune. And more or less, this is the situation of most of our urban rivers. As you can see, the river itself is reduced to a very small channel within the larger riverbed. It is a cemented channel, so there is no natural channel left. The channel bed is encroached with road. There is a road through the riverbed. There is a circus which is being put up here, and there are so many other things. Those who are familiar with Pune will know that this is used for eating joints and circus and parking and so many things. So, and of course, if you see the water in the river itself, there is hardly any water. It's really the city sewage which is flowing there, as can be seen from all the vegetation. This is a photo of the Assi River, which is the half or one of the two rivers from which the glorious city of Varanasi gets its name, Varuna and Assi. And this is the Assi River in Varanasi, and we can see that the Assi River also has been turned into virtually a garbage dump. It has been encroached upon, and it's more like a sewer rather than a river itself. This is the Wardha River in Western Maharashtra, and you can see that a whole lot of polluted water is being directly released into the river. This is a satellite imagery of the same spot, and this essentially is the mine drainage from one of the mines along the Wardha River near that in Chandrapur district and that side. There are lots of mines in Wardha district. So this is the scene. So these are some of the things that we are doing to the river. This is a satellite image of the Hasdev River, one of the large tributaries of the Mahanadi. And this is in Korba city of Korba, where there are many coal mines and there are many thermal power plants. And as you can see, this river, which is coming from the right-hand side of the picture, it is named as Kesla River in this map. You can read that, Kesla River. That is essentially what it is carrying is fly ash laden water. And this is the entire fly ash. The whole river is actually just fly ash laden water, and you can see the difference very clearly where it meets the Hasdev River. So this is what we have been doing to our rivers. And while of course individually we can try and understand that, okay, this is why we are doing this to the, I mean, this state of this river is because we are turning into a garbage dump, or we are taking away all the water from it, and so on and so forth. I think the individual actions that we are doing to our rivers are a product of a larger approach or our perspective of how we are looking at our rivers and water. And that is what I want to explore here. So that is what I call the dominant perspective on rivers and water, because that is the dominant one. That's the one which is playing out. And for that, I want to show you start with a little press clipping, a press statement by Nitin Gadkari. This is just a few years old, 2 or 3 years old, where it says center plans to transfer surplus Godavari water to Kaveri water. This is some announcement. Gadkari was the water resource minister at that time. So this is the announcement he made. And then the details of that announcement. And there is an interesting statement in that, which I want to point out. Gadkari said that 3,000 TMC of water from the Godavari goes waste into the sea, and therefore he is going to transfer that water to the Kaveri. Now, this notion that water which is flowing into the river and then flows into the sea, which is a very, very, basic character of any river, that it starts from the catchment area and then moves on and goes and meets the sea. This natural flow is actually a waste. This notion is I would say it's the most important, or it's the central pillar of our existing paradigm of how we look at rivers. This is what defines, this is the defining character of our entire approach towards water resource management in this country. That any water that goes, that flows and goes into the sea is a waste. Essentially, any water that we don't use is a waste. So basically, what we are saying is any water that is unused is basically a waste. Now, this notion, of course, is not a modern notion, but this notion has been the defining one for several decades. Let's look at a statement from India's first 5-year plan, and this was in 1950. So the first 5-year plan document, when it talks about irrigation, stated that, this is a quote from that: a more recent appraisal of water resources of the country gives the total annual flow as equivalent to 1356 million acre feet. Of this, only 76 million acre feet, or 5.6%, are being used for the purpose of irrigation. The rest flow waste to the sea. So you can see, now, of course, somebody may say that that time only 5.6% of the water was being used. So, yes, we can see the rest as waste. But we see that 60 years or 70 years later, also, we are using exactly the same words, and we have exactly the same approach. So that is how it has been. And you can see that in, this is something which gives us the moral justification for taking away water from the river or from any other water source, and for doing the kind of intervention that we are using. So this is the whole, justification, because you will see this is being used in the water policy documents. This is used when our leaders talk about any new project and so on. So this is the moral justification. This is what gives them the right, or this is what gives us the right to take water away from the rivers. Now, this has certain implications. This, of course, translates into the other parallel or equivalent notion of using every last drop of water, whether it's in the river or from any other water body. And this has implications for our planning process. So our planning process is guided by this principle of using every last drop, because if we don't use that drop, it is going waste. So that is the basic principle here. And that has led to massive diversions and extraction of water from rivers and water bodies. The extent is huge. And to do that, the most important means that we have used is construction of large dams. And India has more than 5,000 large dams, making it the third highest in terms of the number of large dams constructed in the world, after China and the USA. And in India, the river basin planning exercise, essentially what is called as a river basin planning in India, means it's a plan how to extract every last drop. And let me just give one example. Though I mentioned Narmada and Kaveri, I just want to give Narmada as an example because I have been long associated with it. The Narmada is a river which flows through 3 states: Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, and Gujarat. And when the plan to use the waters of the Narmada was taken up in the early 50s, then 60s, a dispute arose between the three states in terms of which state will get how much water. And so a tribunal was set up, the Narmada Water Disputes Tribunal, which finally gave its judgment or award in 1979. Now, the tribunal estimated that the water available in the Narmada is 28 million acre feet. This is the average, actually, it's a 75% dependable yield. So 28 million acre feet is the water available in the Narmada. And it allocated the water to the states of Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh, and Maharashtra, and Rajasthan was also involved. All the complete 28 million acre feet was allocated to each state. This means that if every state uses its allocation, then there will not be a drop of water left in the river. And in fact, they also go on to say that in the year, because this is an average kind of a figure, so they say in the years when there is a surplus, the surplus will also be shared in the same proportion by the four states. And this is exactly what has happened. Now that many of the dams are coming up, what we are seeing now is the river below Sardar Sarovar Dam, which is the last dam on the Narmada River. The river virtually dries up in many of the months, which was never happened in the whatever say the million years that the Narmada has been flowing. So this is our approach that we plan. It's actually a deliberate act that we want to remove every drop of water from the river, which is why we have rivers like Krishna no longer reach the sea in many of the years, So therefore, they are now being called as closed basins, which has been the result of this whole planning policy. And this is not restricted to rivers. We have the same approach for groundwater. Wherever there is groundwater, we are extracting the groundwater, and India is the largest extractor of groundwater in the world. We extract more than the next two countries, USA and China combined. So we are extracting huge amounts of groundwater in the country. And of course, it's not only using the last drop, but last drop and more, because in many cases, we are extracting more than what is being recharged. The result again is there. This is a map which categorizes the groundwater units. And as you can see, basically the red units are what is called as overexploited. That is, we are using more water than that is being recharged. So again, this comes from this basic approach that every little drop of water we need to be able to use for our needs. But there is, this is what I would call as a unidimensional view of the river. This comes from a unidimensional view of river or our water resources. Because for us, river is only a resource. It is only when we look at it, a river like this, or a groundwater aquifer, or any other water body as only a resource. It's only then that we can talk about removing every drop of water, or anything that we don't use is a waste. The river at best is a store of water, sand, and land, nothing else. Basically, and then we are going to extract all three of them. I'll show a little bit about sand and land also. So, of course, we are extracting water, which I've already talked about. We are also extracting sand and boulders in a huge proportion, huge proportion. This is a small picture, but this kind of a scene is so common in rivers all over the country. In fact, I would like to say that this problem is such a major problem that right now, what we have a series going on, a webinar series organized by the India Rivers Week. The India Rivers Week is a very important initiative vis-a-vis rivers, where every year there used to be a gathering of some about 100 people who have been working or are working on river related issues in the country. Every year this happens in November. This year it's happening online, and this year the theme for the whole online webinar is sand mining, because sand mining has destroyed large number of rivers in the country. But again, we treat the river as a resource for sand and just extract the sand to a massive extent. And then, of course, the land through which the river is flowing, the riverbed is very precious. Land is precious in this country anyway, and the riverbed land, of course, is all the more precious, particularly when there are urban rivers. So typically, you will see that urban rivers, the riverbed has virtually vanished, and that land has been reclaimed. We have a nice word for it, we call it reclamation, and that happens in the urban areas. It happens in the non-urban areas where you build an embankment on the river, and the land outside the embankment is reclaimed. And now we also are looking at, of course, the water is gone, the sand boulders are gone, the river bed is gone. What is left is the river channel. And we are also now trying to claim the river channel through the inland waterways, which is one of the latest kind of developmental intervention in our waterways. Of course, waterways have been there for many generations or hundreds of years. We have been using rivers as navigation channels, but now we have a huge project called the National Inland Waterways Program, which wants to turn, this is a small map showing the proposed inland waterways, which wants to turn 111 river or river stretches into large navigational channels, basically, which will, where barges of 2,000, 3,000 tons and large cruise ships will ply. So that's the plan. And of course, that involves, because we don't have those kind of depths and water. So that actually involves creating that channel through dredging, through digging, and which is a huge intervention in the river. Here we can see a dredger in operation. So this is really what we are looking at, rivers as a resource. But there is a further dimension to it. When we say that any water that is not used is a waste, it doesn't mean any use. The unsaid word is any water that is not used for human needs is a waste. Because only human use is considered legitimate. Otherwise, of course, in reality, the flowing water of the river has so many other uses, because the flowing water maintains the ecology of the river and the floodplains. The fish survive on it. It transports sediment from the catchment to the sea. It maintains the estuaries in the delta. So there are so many functions which the river and the flowing river performs. Many of them cater to human needs also, but many of them cater to non-human needs, and therefore they are not really considered as uses. And we are happy to take away we are happy that even when we take the water for human needs, it doesn't matter if some of the other uses get impacted or destroyed. But of course, there is a further twist to this. All humans are not equal. So even among human needs, the needs of certain people are prioritized. So even in human needs, the needs of the elite, the powerful, the rich are prioritized. We have various divides, axes of division in this country: rural, urban, tribal, non-tribal, women, men. And you can see that in every place, the way the water is used, for whom the water is used, how the water is used, it is highly iniquitous. And I would say that inequity is the second most important, or I wouldn't say second most in terms of ranking. I'm saying is the second critical or the most important hallmark of our entire approach to water resource management in this country. The first being that any water that is unused or goes to the sea is a waste, and second is inequity. These two are the most important pillars of our approach to water resource management in this country. And as I said, there are several axes: Dalits, tribals, rural areas. One interesting divide is the non-profit and non-monetary use of water, which is often sidelined because it is not considered an important use. And you will see that in many cases, wherever a use of the water is not generating money or cash, it is sidelined. And then often you see that when projects are being discussed and planned, we have, for the namesake, a cost benefit analysis done, where some monetary benefit is attributed to say the aesthetic use of water or the cultural use of water. But this is really ridiculous. You are comparing the non-comparable, because when you put monetary use, when you put monetary values on certain uses, they will never compare with the kind of money you are generating from hydropower or irrigation, because also the way you allot the monetary values, so that way it is the whole setup is such that non-monetary use is essentially a sideline. And the inequity is reflected not only in terms of amount of water used or this thing, but in terms of the some of these who gets to use the water and how. So downstream impacts of dams, where the dams store water upstream and divert the water at the stream, whereas the downstream sections of the dam, the river downstream of the dam is almost dry, becomes almost dry. This is one aspect of the way the inequity is expressed. Pollution is another way in which the inequity is expressed. So these are various manifestations of inequity. In fact, there is a very popular way of putting this inequity, which I think all of you will understand very well, that, it is said often in common parlance that water flows in the direction of gravity. But if you look at water management, then water doesn't flow in the direction of gravity. Water actually flows in the direction of power, whether it is political power or economic power. And that is the manifestation of equity. Just to give you a very cliched picture, I'm sorry for using the cliched picture, but the problem is that this cliche is the sad reality for millions of people. So I'm just giving you this kind of scene where people have to wait and queue up for water for hours and walk for kilometers to get water is so common in the country. And actually, the people you see in this picture here are probably among the lucky ones because they have this source, but most people don't. As against this, which is also a fairly common picture in many parts of the thing. So these are, self-evident. So I'm going to stop here for a minute, and if anybody has any clarificatory questions, then I think we can take them. Otherwise, I'll continue.
Hello, sir.
Yes.
So as we discussed, the Sardar Sarovar Dam and similar projects, they are government projects, so they should have required EIA.
Yes.
So if they have such huge impact on environment, how do they get the clearance from EIA?
Yeah. So, of course, when Sardar Sarovar was being planned and designed and built, they really didn't do an EIA. They claimed that they didn't require, and we claimed in the Supreme Court that it's required. So that's a whole different discussion. But yes, subsequent to that, there has been a formal requirement since '94, at least legally, for projects like that to get the EIA. But 99% of the EIAs which are done for such projects, whether it is a dam or whether it is any other kind of project, are so shoddy, really, that the whole purpose is basically just to get the clearance. So I think that's a very important, but unfortunately a very different story. It also depends upon who does the EIA. For example, the EIAs are done by consultants who are engaged, commissioned, and selected, commissioned, and paid for by the project proponent. So that itself is the right from beginning is the first conflict of interest. So there are a lot of issues involved there, but most EIAs are extremely shoddy. They don't do the assessment of the impacts properly, and more important than that, once the EIA is done, the process of scrutinizing the EIA and looking at the project benefits, project impacts, and then seeing whether the impacts, how high the impacts are, and whether that means that we should not go ahead with the project. That process itself is also very, very flawed. And in fact, this whole process of impact assessment and scrutiny of environmental impacts and the way it is integrated into the governance and regulatory process and decision-making process is a very important topic, but I think it's a somewhat more detailed and a separate discussion, though I'll mention it in the passing in this also, but that's what I would like to say.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah. Anybody else?
Hello.
Yes.
Sir, when we talk about surplus of water, so how do government agencies define the surplus? Is it only how much water is going waste to the sea, or is there some criteria to which the government has defined surplus?
Yeah. So I'll come to this notion of surplus a little later on. So if you don't mind, please hold the question till then. Okay. Yeah. Because I would suggest that let's look at only clarificatory questions. This, and anyway, I'm coming to surplus later on. Anybody else? Okay. So I think let me just go ahead and then we'll again pause at another, like after another 10 minutes. So inequity is another most crucial hallmark. Then of course, this whole notion that domination of nature is the important part, that we are dominating nature and we are, we can bend nature to our will and we can dominate nature to meet our needs. That is the another aspect of this. And domination and control of nature for human needs is the core philosophy. And again, that's not just for the water resources, it's there for our entire way of looking at the whole process of development. Engineers play a central role in this, unfortunately. And therefore, this has certain implications again for developmental planning. Bigger is better. It's more macho also. So there is a big patriarchal side to it. There is a gender side to it. Bigger is better. Bigger is like, bigger demonstration of power. So therefore, we are leading to increasing scales and extent of interventions. We want from smaller dams to bigger dams and bigger dams and bigger this, and so therefore we merrily go ahead and think nothing about reshaping our rivers and water bodies. So the interlinking of rivers project is essentially nothing but reshaping the entire, the drainage patterns of this country. That's what we are trying to do. That's what we are thinking of doing. And of course, we have also already doing that in a lot of things. So the sum total of this is what is increasingly being called as Anthropocene, that, humans are now the biggest influence on this planet, and we are, able to influence planetary processes at that level. So this is the extent to which we have gone. And of course, water is not left out of this.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
Sir, Penance has raised it, and sir, anything?
Yeah. Thank you. You did raise a lot of important points, and so while working across different countries and looking at the investment patterns, you did mention that there is a lot of big investments happening in India.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you. I'm sorry, I can't hear you properly.
Really? Sorry. Can you hear me now? Is it better?
Yes, better.
Yeah. So the question is, like, we know that I'm not going to name the agencies or funders that are funding these big projects, but what is it, and what is your call, and why are these big funders constantly able
I'm
to
sorry, I just can't, I'm not able to understand the question. Maybe if you just type it out and
I'll do that.
Yeah, please, somebody can read it out to me.
But in the meanwhile, you can continue. I think you can take, whenever you will take a break, you can answer.
Okay, I'll do that. Maybe I'll do that. Yeah, thanks. Okay. So that's where we are now in, at the Anthropocene level. So what is the result? Yes, there have been certain benefits by this whole approach. There has been a massive expansion of irrigation. There has been increase in water supply and use in industry and domestic use. Because of the expansion in irrigation, we have seen massive growth in food production. And yet we see that the basic needs of millions of people have not been met. So there is a big question over this entire approach. And we see a shift towards intensive and commercial use, whether it's in agriculture, in industry, in urban areas, both these words, intensive use, that is, we use as much water as possible, and commercial. So the non-monetary or non-financial needs are being sidelined, and increasingly commercial use is being prioritized. And of course, what we have also seen is the destruction of our rivers, water bodies, wetlands, and groundwater. So this has been the kind of net impact of our whole exercise. So if we want to move away from this, then what I propose is that we need a complete relook or rethinking of this whole approach. It's not like a patchwork solution that is going to work, but how we understand and look at rivers is going to be the, unless we have that fundamental shift, it's not going to work. So what can be the elements of this different perspective? I want to outline those, but before that, maybe if that question has been typed out, we can take that. Otherwise, we'll just go ahead.
Abhinav or somebody can read Professor Penance's question, please.
Yes, sir. So Penanza says that what is the reason that there is constant overlooking of EIA and more big funders continuing investments?
Yes. So I think that's what is the thing that everywhere, as I said, our mindset is such that we believe that extracting every last drop is important, otherwise it's going waste. And therefore, every other consideration is secondary. Similarly, human use is the most important. So if human use is being prioritized and in the process some other use or some the rights or the lives or the existence of some other non-human entities is being impacted, too bad, because human beings is most important. So these characteristics, that's what I'm saying. The whole EIA process is loaded by being anthropocentric and by legitimizing, or the moral justification is basically that every drop of water must be used. So then, the once you start with this premise, you can reach to only one conclusion, that anything that justifies using every drop of water has to go through, no matter what it does to anything else in this system. So that's what I'm trying to say. It's not, the answer to why this kind of an EIA or why this kind of projects go ahead lies in this whole mindset that we have seen. We see that as right. That's the correct thing. Those are our values. Those are our value systems. And I think that's the most crucial thing. I had not used the word values so far. I was planning to sort of bring that at the end. But what I have been talking about as the dominant paradigm essentially are our value. It's our value system of how we look at water. And unless we change that value system, it's not going to change. So what is that change that should be there? I think it's kind of obvious that if we want the dominant perspective to change and we want to evolve into a different perspective, then I think we will have to adopt a value system which is completely almost point to point opposite of what we have in the dominant paradigm. So I have outlined a few things as the elements of a different perspective. First of all, there has to be a recognition of the ecological nature and role of water. Water and rivers are not quote unquote resources or commodities for human needs. They are ecological entities. There is an ecological nature. Water is a part of the ecology and it's also a sustainer of ecology. It plays both the roles. I think that is also very important. It itself is a part of ecology. It also sustains ecology. Water has multiple roles. Yes, there is a sustenance role that water plays, but sustenance not only for human beings, but sustenance for other life forms. It has a social role, it has a cultural role, religious, identity. Many of the tribes, particularly in the Northeast, for example, have their identity very closely linked to rivers. And of course, it has an economic and commercial role, which is, of course, a part of our human destiny. So we have to recognize these multiple roles. And our value system has to prioritize maintaining and restoring the ecology of the water systems. Unless we put this at the center and align our developmental interventions to this, we are not going to see a different result. And we have to ensure that water is there for all living and non-living. That should be water for all living and non-living systems, and a less anthropocentric approach. So this is what should be elements of a different perspective. And of course, equity has to be a central feature, because when we are talking about everybody getting access to water, then that's basically equity, and equity has certain other importance, which I'll come to in a moment. So what are the implications of all these points? What are the implications for planning and for water resource management? So I think the first thing is there has to be judicious withdrawal and consumption. Now, of course, I understand that these are subjective words, but there have been ways and means of trying to then see what that means. So at least one would say that one doesn't have a kind of a carte blanche, like a blank check for withdrawing how much ever we want. The withdrawals and consumption of water has to be judicious. Human interventions have to follow and align with natural cycles. Most of our interventions break the natural cycles. For example, we stop the flow of water of the rivers flowing into the sea. That's a break of the natural cycle. So we need to align and follow the natural cycles, and we need to maintain them as much as possible. we must have the principle of minimal intervention. So whatever is basic necessary, I think that's about another way of saying judicious withdrawals. And prioritization of water needs is and water uses is very, very critical, with basic needs getting priority. Now, because when you talk about minimal intervention, judicious withdrawals, then what we are saying is we should be withdrawing much lesser water than we are today. And then that also means that that same water has to meet the needs of everybody. So the more high priority needs, which are the basic needs, must get priority. Otherwise, of course, it won't work. There will be a lot of social unrest, and inequity has to be addressed. Now, is this kind of a thing that we are talking about just wishful thinking, or there is some science that this can actually be thought of by the policymakers? So I want to point to 2 or 3 what I call as positive signs in the policymaking circles. Now, I'm not naive. I understand that I would say that things are still fundamentally very much the same. But what I'm saying is we can see some signs that the kind of things we are talking about in a different paradigm are being seen or are finding their place in the mainstream narrative. And I think that's very, very important. And I would say that instead of looking at this as in a very naive manner, now everything is going to become fine, it's not. I think what we should look at these positive signs is that these small changes in the mindset can offer us leverage points of anchoring where we can then push for more change. So with that, I want to point to 3 developments in the recent past, which I see as some positive signs. So first of all, there is this proposed national framework law, national water framework law, which is a kind of a law where, though water is a state subject, the central government has talked about bringing a national law, which is not a law by itself, but which is a law which will lay down the framework for other laws related to water. And it's very interesting that this law was first suggested and a draft was prepared before 2014 by the earlier government. And the same process was continued, and another draft was formulated by the government which came in after 2014, which, in spite of their other differences with the earlier government, the National Water Framework Law process has gone on. And if you see the draft of this framework law, that it does incorporate some of the very important principles that I've talked about earlier. For example, looking at water as an ecological entity, prioritizing basic needs, so on and so forth. So I won't go into the details of that, but I think this is an important thing. Of course, after the draft, the progress on that has been very, very slow, but at least it's a recognition of some of these principles within the mainstream space. Then we have the Ganga River Basin Management Plan, which I'll come to in a minute. I'll spend a minute on that in next slide. And then we have the entire principle or approach of environmental flows, which also I shall take up in the subsequent slide. So let us look at the Ganga Rejuvenation Program, which is the kind of a flagship program for this government when it came up, the Namami Gange or the Ganga Rejuvenation Program, which incidentally is based on the Ganga River Basin Management Plan. So again, interestingly, before 2014, the earlier government commissioned a consortium of 7 IITs. At that time, there were only 7, I think, yeah. So 7 IITs, a consortium of 7 IITs was commissioned to, and I'm sure many of you would be familiar with it. Some of you like NC and others have also contributed to that plan. The 7 IITs consortium was commissioned to prepare a Ganga River Basin Management Plan, which they prepared, and that has been accepted as being the basis on which the Namami Gange or the Ganga Rejuvenation Program is being carried out by this government. Now, whether it is actually being followed in letter and spirit is a different thing, but at least in principle it has been accepted. This Ganga River Basin Management Plan has certain key elements where they say that to preserve or restore the wholesomeness of Ganga, we need these elements. And then, of course, this is not applicable just for Ganga, it's there for every river. So these are the 4 key elements. What are the 4 key elements? Aviral dhara, or the uninterrupted flow. Nirmal dhara, unpolluted water, unpolluted flow. Preserving the ecological integrity of the river, and preserving the geological integrity of the river, which means the floodplains, which means the morphology, which means the catchment, and so on and so forth. And the Ganga management plan also gives another very important notion, that is of connectivity, that the river has 3 directions of connectivity, and they must be also maintained: the lateral connectivity, longitudinal connectivity, and the vertical connectivity. So along its length, along its breadth, and along its depth. If you see, actually, these elements represent very important aspects of a differing perspective for water and river management. I won't, of course, go into the details. We don't have time, but I think it's a very important thing. Now, let us come to this e-flows or environmental flows. So what is environmental flows? Actually, environmental flows is not a very new concept. Essentially, it's just another way of saying that we should keep the rivers flowing. Unlike what we have seen in India, where many of the rivers have dried up, they don't need the sea. We should keep the rivers flowing. This is a very simple thing. Environmental flows is a more structured and formalized articulation of the same principle. And what is more important is it is emerging globally as a well-developed scientific multidisciplinary field where expert-driven specialization combines with the knowledge and understanding of riparian and other communities to create a scientific as well as a political process. Because what is it? See, it basically says you need to keep the rivers flowing. What does that mean? It doesn't mean that we should not use any water of the river, but we must take out some, we can take out some water and keep the rest in the river. So how much to take out? This is at the core a political decision. It's a societal decision, but it must be based on 2 things. A multidisciplinary, studied, informed knowledge of what will happen when we take out X quantity of water or Y quantity of water. And it is also a political process. So the communities, the riparian communities, other people, everybody should come together and come to a acceptable decision that yes, we must, we can take out so much water and no more. That's why it's a very interesting process. And that's why environmental flows as a approach has become very, very important. It is becoming a key framework for informed participatory decision-making in river basin planning. And one of the reasons to take environmental flows more seriously is that the central government is, at least the central government, also some of the state governments, is trying to do fairly significant things in bringing this into the regulatory framework for water resource management. For example, they have notified environmental flows in some parts of the Ganga basin, which are now legally binding. The environment clearances given to some of the dam projects do require environmental flows to be maintained. Of course, they are very, very minimalistic, and it's really very ad hoc. It's not really scientific. It's not, definitely not a participatory process. All that is done, but at least it is, as I said, there is a foothold there. That's why e-flows is very important. Just to give some concepts, a very widely accepted definition is from the so-called Brisbane Declaration. What are environmental flows? Environmental flows is the quantity, timing, and quality of water flows required to sustain freshwater and estuarine ecosystems and human livelihoods and well-beings that depend on these ecosystems. So, we are not talking about flows as just quantity, but it's the quantity, the pattern, and also they involve not just the flow of water, but also sediments and nutrients. So I think this is very important. And of course, as I mentioned, environmental flows is a societal choice. And environmental flows is something very different from minimum flows. Okay, I'll stop here for a minute.
Abhinav, can you mute all the people's mics? As a host, you can do that, I think.
Yes, I am muted.
Yeah. So, but now if there are questions, we can take.
Yeah.
After the questions, please mute all people's mics.
Yes, sir.
Okay, will you please do that? Okay. So, if there are any questions, we can take now for the time being, and then Shripad may continue.
Okay.
Okay, there is a hand. Anand Kumar Ravichandran's hand is up.
Yeah. Please.
Hello.
Yeah,
hello, Anand. Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, sir. Sir, when you were talking about our implication for planning and to have a paradigm shift in the way how to we perceive water, so you have mentioned some what are the interventions that we can make. So in that, like when we talk about like this Ganga rejuvenation project, so it is on a national scale, so it can be taken place like when the government come together and do it. But another aspect that you have mentioned is the judicious withdrawal and consumption. So when we take this to a micro level or to an individual level, so how it can be like taken, sir?
Yeah. I'll come to that with some examples at the end of my presentation. So I think your question will be answered at that point. I'll come to that.
Sure, sir. Thank you.
Anything else?
Sir?
There is another raised hand. Satish, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I think I'll come in at the end of your presentation because I thought probably you were nearing completion. So I'll raise the issue at that stage.
I think another 10 minutes we should be done with that.
Okay, I think Abhinav, now you should mute all mics so that there's no disturbance and let him complete. Then we'll come to the question.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, so one of the things that I want to talk about, just mention very quickly about environmental flows, I don't want to get into detail, is that environmental flows is different from minimum flows. It doesn't mean keeping the river flowing, but it also means that we sustain the patterns of the flow. So, for example, just to give you an example, this is the flow pattern of the Lohit River in Arunachal. And as you can see, the flow pattern is very varied with high flows, low flows, and all that. And the thing is, each of these components of the flow perform a specific function. So, the low flows perform certain functions, the high floods perform certain functions. So when we talk about having environmental flows, then what we are also talking about is essentially mimicking the natural flows. Just to give an example of, I think we'll skip a little bit of this, just to give an example of how both high and low flows matter. This is a view of the Hasdev River just before it meets the Mahanadi, just before the Sangam or the confluence. Now, if you see this open patch of land in Hasdev, or for that matter, any river, this is used extensively for cultivation of crops like watermelon, muskmelon, cucumber in the summer months. Okay, and that is possible because of the unique flow pattern of the river. So in the monsoon, this river spreads across the entire riverbed and deposits moisture and nutrients in this portion, which makes possible the crop to be taken. But then the river has also to go to the low flow to expose that land to allow that to be taken. So what I'm trying to say is that when you talk about environmental flows, it's not just about one steady flow, but it's about having all the various components of low and high flows in that. Now, why is environmental flow such an important thing, apart from it being a very useful analytical and management tool kind of a thing? The thing is, the environmental flows notion actually represents a paradigm shift from the dominant paradigm. So for example, the environmental flow actually turns the conventional paradigm on its head. And I'm not sure whether the planners really, when they adopt environmental flow, are recognizing that this is what is happening, a shift is happening. Instead of seeing water that is flowing to the sea as a waste, we actually require significant water to flow to the sea. So I think that is the complete 180-degree shift. Environmental flows require the water to serve interests of ecology and other life forms, not just humans. And the environmental flows questions the notion of surplus rivers. Somebody had asked the question about surplus. Really, actually, there is no surplus water in a river. Yes, of course, the government has its own way of calculating surplus. They just say that, okay, we have so much irrigable land in a river basin, and if we have more water than can reach the irrigable land, then that water is surplus. But actually, if you see, the entire ecosystem of any river basin has evolved to match the flow in that river. And in fact, the lifestyle, the economy of the riverine communities, human communities, has also evolved to match the flow in that river. So the ecology and the economy of Ganga basin is very different from that, say, a river in Jaisalmer or Rajasthan. So a river is not surplus. A river has just enough, every river has just about enough water to meet the needs of its own ecology and economy. That's what I would say. So I think the notion of surplus, which is the kind of the basis on which the interlinking of river is planned, that certain rivers are surplus and certain rivers are deficit, is ecologically a flawed notion. And the notion of environmental flows questions this surplus thing. And of course, in the environmental flows model, participation can lead to much more equity. And there is a balancing between the extraction and river conservation. So I think these are the important elements by which the environmental flows approach shows a paradigm shift. And it's a balancing between human use and ecology. Now, of course, this main important question, can we meet our needs? I'll just take about 5 to 6 more minutes to finish the presentation. It's all very well to say, okay, conserve our rivers and withdraw less water and this and that. But then what happens to our needs? Can we meet our needs? And I think the answer to that, at least I would say the indications, there are strong indications that we can meet our needs, provided we look at our cropping pattern choices and food choices. We look at decentralized water harvesting because that allows us to meet our needs without necessarily having major interventions in the rivers. And we look at alternative sources of energy, and we look at non-consumptive in situ uses of water. And of course, we use certain technological advances to increase efficiency of water use, efficiency of water transmission, so on and so forth. And equity has to be a central feature. So just to quickly give some examples, and somebody had asked about how we can do at the micro level. Let me give these 2-3 examples will give what we can possibly do. There are many more, I'm just giving 2 or 3. This is a field in Punjab. There was a study done in 2018 which says the states of Punjab, Haryana, Andhra Pradesh and Tamil Nadu consume excessively large quantities of irrigation water. Farmers and governments in these states need to reallocate part of the rice area, at least 15 to 20% of that area, to other less water consuming value crops, dairy and fodder production and horticulture orchards. Why is this so? Because rice is not a crop that is suited to the ecology, climate and that area. It's not Punjab and Haryana are largely, many parts are arid and semi-arid. You cannot grow a water intensive crop there, but that's what we have been doing, which means we are using excessive quantities of irrigation water. So if we shift that cropping pattern, and this is one case, there are many others. If we shift the cropping pattern, then we can save a lot of water and also meet our food needs. But it will also involve changing our food habits. In fact, actually, this irrigation system changed our food habits from, say, products like jowar, bajra, makka to just the rice and wheat combination. So we need to go back to some of those things. Just to talk another example of cropping patterns, this is Ujni Dam near Solapur in Maharashtra, the heartland of sugarcane, but it's a drought-prone area. If you look at the natural rainfall and patterns, then it's a drought-prone area. Now, the Kelkar committee, which was set up by the government of Maharashtra in 2013, among other things, it has said, if the sugarcane crop in Western Maharashtra and Marathwada is converted to fully drip irrigated crop, they are not even saying eliminate sugarcane. If it is converted to drip irrigation crop, protective irrigation will be possible for 45 lakh hectare rain-fed crops in Western Maharashtra and 15 lakh in Marathwada. And this together, 45 lakhs and 15 lakh hectares, that is about 6 million hectares, was the total irrigated area in Maharashtra at that time. So you can imagine the extent of water that can be saved just by converting to drip irrigation. And remember, as I said, this is 2 times more the currently irrigated area in the state, and this is without decreasing the yield of sugarcane. So these are the possibilities. If we look at alternative sources of energy, because hydropower is considered as one of the major reasons to build large dams and intervene in our rivers. Solar, for example, is emerging as a very, very important source of much cheaper energy. This is a graph, 2 years old actually, but now the prices are also falling further. Prices for solar PV are falling very sharply. and strongly. In fact, now solar is much cheaper than new hydropower projects. And what we are also seeing is that the price of storage is also falling significantly, which means that solar PV plus storage could offer a very good alternative to what is thought of as the main kind of USP of hydropower, that is providing the peaking power or balancing power benefits. And decentralized water harvesting. Decentralized water harvesting or watershed management, there are different ways in which people look at it. It is important because it is much more aligned to the natural water cycles, and of course, the way we have to, of course, understand the way it is carried out, but it can provide the similar benefits at much less water extraction. Now, this example I'm giving, it is in the context of the Sardar Sarovar project. So there was an article in 2009. Of course, now it's 10 years back, but I think the basic principles still hold. The semi-arid Gujarat has clocked high and steady growth at 9.6% in agriculture state domestic product since 1990-2000. So for almost 8 or 9 years there. What has driven this growth? Canal irrigated South and Central Gujarat should have led Gujarat's agricultural rally. Instead, it is dry Saurashtra and Kutch and North Gujarat that have been at the forefront. These could not have performed so well but for the improved availability of groundwater for irrigation. Arguably, mass-based water harvesting and farm power reforms have helped energize Gujarat's agriculture. And just a quick look at some figures. So they give some figures. So you have the large government dams, which includes Sardar Sarovar project. This is the SSP. Okay. The area served by that is 650,000 hectares. And the value of crop and milk output, now this is economic value, so this is in money terms, so 5,000 crores. Whereas if you look at the decentralized rainwater harvesting structures, they serve almost 10 times the area and they provide twice the monetary output. And if you look at this column number 3, volume of water, the large government dams are storing actually 37 or 38 billion cubic meters of water, whereas the decentralized water structures are dealing with only 2.5. That is because they are dealing with supplemental or protective irrigation. But this can lead to huge increases in production and productivity, and the benefits are far more distributed, almost 10 times the land, which means 10 times the number of families will benefit. So it is possible to do that, but equity has to be enshrined. Different ways have to be enshrined. So it's possible. A shift to an ecology or equity based perspective of managing our river and water can meet our needs and restore and conserve our rivers, water bodies, provided there is judicious use, provided there is equity, we can do it. So these two things, judicious use, which is characterized by so many of the things that I talked about, and equity, if we do that, then it's possible. Thank you. So that's the end of my presentation. We can now have questions and discussion. And I think I can stop share now.
Yes, sir. I think in the chats we have a question which says that how do you see the export of water in the form of agricultural and industrial produce in the paradigm of e-flows?
Right. So I think this export of water, or what is called as virtual water export, because you are exporting high value, high water added crops like rice or some of the others, it is a serious problem, definitely. So I think environmental flows as a framework has enough, it has enough provisions to take care of that. But ultimately, as I said, environmental flows is a societal choice. So when you plan a river basin, I think that's when you have to make a decision. Is it possible to use the water here to export water intensive crops? Because I think one of the most important parts of water management, and because almost 80% of our water is used for irrigation, and so agriculture and food and agriculture related uses is a critical part of our water management. I think we should, when we look at that, we should not forget our farmers. So I think it's very important for our water use choices to also ensure that farmers get a good livelihood. In fact, a lot of the persistence of crops like rice or sugarcane in water arid areas is because we ensure that the farmers get a good livelihood from that by paying, the support price and procurement. So I think that is why the virtual export of water is happening in a big way, because those are the crops which are where market is provided. So I think we need to ensure that we provide that kind of pricing and ensure livelihoods for farmers with even less water intensive crops. Then I think we can definitely manage. And water intensive crops should be reserved for areas which has more water. So I think even the notion of what is water intensive can be different. If a crop is suited to an agroclimatic character of that area, then it's not necessarily water intensive in that area. So rice grown in Kerala or rice grown in Konkan may not be water intensive.
Yes, sir. Gopal, you can place your question. Gopal, can you unmute yourself? I think Satish sir, you can ask your question.
First of all, thanks for a very thought-provoking presentation. I'm putting a slightly different angle to this whole perception that big dams, etc., are driven by the engineers' kind of fascination for controlling the nature, etc. I think that's a old, dated Western context theme, which has been kept alive here, but has been hollowed out. And my submission to you is that these bigger projects are supported basically because of the corruption cushion involved there. I got it. I came face to face with this when, as a district magistrate in one particular district, there were a number of minor irrigation projects. And since I had some interest in analyzing the information, I found that invariably the projected area cut, that is the area that the minor irrigation project would cover, and the certified area cut, which was done by the Tahsildars, the certified area cut will always be much less than the projected area cut. So I asked the executive engineer, and he said, "कि नहीं sir, वो जो World Bank के norm worm होते हैं, उसमें fit करना पड़ता है." So that fit करना पड़ता है was an interesting thing. And second issue was, I did an analysis of about 11 projects in the pipeline, and I did a very simple thumb rule, and I sent it to irrigation department, saying that since you don't have money for it, why don't you sanction it in order of that project which gives me maximum irrigation per 1 lakh rupees. With that, 1987 1 lakh rupees was quite a lot. You do that. I was very politely advised by the irrigation secretary to mind my own business, because but then you can't push a district magistrate beyond a point. So I went ahead and did something else, where we went in for low-cost check dams, and as against minor irrigation department's cost of 12,000 rupees per acre, our cost came to something like 1,400. Now that created a huge kind of uproar. The entire minor irrigation hierarchy almost went up in arms against me, saying that this was in defiance of the PWD code or whatever their code was. And I was even asked how would I react if 42,000 rupees are recovered from my salary. It's a different story, but I had asked with a very poker face. I said, do you want 42,000 in one installment or 1,000 in 42 installments? But subsequently, in urban projects, in water resources project, what I realized was that this whole penchant for large projects was driven not so much by that professional pride in taming the nature, but it was more by corruption. And I think unless we and this whole Maharashtra is a prime example of you leave them halfway through because you have made your money, so the remaining part doesn't remain attractive, or canals are not that attractive because you don't make that kind of a money, so they remain at the back burner. So unless this is systematically analyzed and exposed, I think we will labor under this wrong notion that this is engineers' fascination for controlling the nature. I'd like your reactions. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't think that really requires any comment too much, but I agree completely with you that a lot of these large projects are driven by the corruption behind it, in spite of the huge evidence which is there that they are not the best or the most optimal choice. So I completely agree with you on that. But I definitely also feel that this kind of the obsession with mega and increasing control of nature is also an element, an important element in our entire mindset. I would definitely like to think that that is an important element, but it's an element, and the specific projects are definitely driven a lot by the corruption. Yes. Thank you.
NC sir.
Yeah. Thank you, Shripad. Pleasure listening to you as always. And also for the timing of this talk when our water course is underway, where we are discussing all these issues. And I think this will strengthen my hands also. So thank you for that. I have a couple of comments supporting your argument. One is when we were in this GRB MP, this Ganga Basin Management Plan, two things we noted one was the hierarchy of the disciplines, where water resources and civil engineering gets an upper hand over, environmental flows, policy, the equity, where some social scientists were also there, So that is one of the things. And then what finally come out is a product of, those things. Second is, within the government, actually, this was commissioned by the Ministry of Environment. And then there is a hierarchy of this, governance ministries also within the governance, where Environment Ministry is, comparatively have a, lower say compared to energy or water resources. And so even if we have a good, kind of policy, like, we have very radical national law framework and all, but implementation, when it comes through the governance realm, I think this power relation also comes through, where our larger goal is the kind of economic growth. And, so I think, so within the larger economic planning, which is now over, but our larger goals still remain as growth. And then this other ministries, will get much more preponderance, which is very clear from the EIA notification, which came in lately. So I think, that may be one of the major constraints that we have in taking forward this, this half is cup full, the cup is half full kind of argument that you are bringing about. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I think this obsession with or the whole pressure of economic growth, which also I think is partly driven by what Satish has said, that corruption, because economic growth, corruption, money, I think these are the kind of things which are major drivers, certainly. So I think that's what I mean by saying that human use is prioritized in many ways in this. So I think that is absolutely right. But I would only say is that this cup half full or some useful developments which are happening, I think what we need to look at them in a way is that these offer leverage points for us to pick up, latch on, and build a very strong advocacy strategy, or very these offer points from where we can make increasing inroads and change the mindset, change the thinking. So that's what I'm trying to say. I'm not saying that they are nowhere even near half full or half empty. I think there's little space which is created. But I think ultimately we need to change the mindset. As you are saying, the hierarchy of disciplines, engineering at the top, others at the bottom, that itself is a part of that mindset. So I think that's how I would see that these offer us some footholds which we need to pick on and push. So that's what I would say.
Pankaj sir.
Yeah, there were a couple of questions in the chat before my hand went up. So do we want to also just deal with that? Maybe Shripad can look at them and then I can.
Okay, sir. I'll just say.
Yeah.
So one of the questions is from Pooja, and she says that as you mentioned that e-flows allows balancing of human and ecological needs. Do we have to see them as being two separate needs? Isn't ensuring that the ecological need is met a prerequisite for long-term sustainability of human use of water?
Yeah. I wonder if this line of argument, positioning ecology versus opposing to human use, can help in changing the dominant paradigm. Could be. I mean, you're absolutely right that preserving the ecology or maintaining the ecology is a prerequisite for long-term sustainability of human use. But often, unfortunately, these are not, some of our decisions or most of our decisions are not governed by a long-term vision. It is governed by a more immediate vision. And in the more immediate vision, our more immediate needs often tend to dominate. So that's why I think it is often seen as one versus the other. But you're absolutely right. I think it is important for us to change that mindset and saying that in reality there should not be. I mean, there is a convergence of the needs of the ecology and the human needs. That I think it would be an interesting way to posit it.
Also, we have Neetu in the chat. She has written that in North Gujarat, groundwater extraction is high, and due to which many districts of this region falls under the critical zone with respect to the groundwater availability. Use of water harvesting structures only relocates the water. The surface runoff, which may reach to river, gets obstructed by the water harvesting structures. So I think in this situation, also reverse flow will be affected, and we still need to look to maintain environment flow for river.
This is again absolutely right, and I think this is an important thing to understand because often this whole issue of rainwater harvesting or watershed management is given like a silver bullet, but it is not. Because as correctly pointed out in this question, the water is it's essentially a zero-sum game in the water basin. Right now, we are not talking about interbasin transfer of water, but once you have defined a basin, then the total quantity of water is fixed in that basin. So I think there are two important elements here. First of all, yes, we need to first of all do the planning at a basin level, because only then we will be able to understand that what is the kind of water which is available to us for use within the basin, consumptive use particularly, and what is the amount of water that we need to allow to flow away or flow away, as a part of the natural cycle. Once we have that fixed, then I think the decentralized water harvesting way of looking at it helps us to use the same amount of water to generate more benefit, or at least generate the benefit equitably. For example, the kind of figures which I mentioned earlier, in that Gujarat case, there the water from this rainwater harvesting was used for meeting the protective irrigation needs. Okay, whereas the North Gujarat example, which is there, is completely, it's a water intensive model where they grow this jeera and other crops, So that's a completely, that's a Punjab style model. That cannot survive anywhere. No amount of water harvesting, no amount of dams that you build, no amounts of Sardar Sarovar you build, that model can be sustained because that's an over extraction. So I think in any water harvesting model of water use, rainwater harvesting, decentralized watershed management, I think the central question does remain, what is that water going to be used for and how? So the demand side of water use is also very, very important. How we use the water, in what quantity, for what water use, and who uses it. So the equity element. Unless that is done, we cannot have a sustainable model. And then, so two parts. One, first of all, you need to have a basin level management kind of approach, So you know how much water is available and how much you have available for extraction for human use, and then within that, a much more judicious and much more equitable use. So I think that's the approach.
Pankaj sir.
Hi, Shripad. Good evening. This is Pankaj Seksaria here.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask a question about the sand mining and the boulder removal that you spoke about, and I think it is something that has, by and large, been missed out in in all these discussions about rivers. It's probably coming up and becoming more prominent now. So I had three related questions. One is, like, we have so much data on water, for instance, water flows, capacities, etc., etc. Is there some kind of meta level analysis ecologically and otherwise of, say, what is sand availability in rivers or river systems? One, what is the extraction amounts? So are there any calculations? So what does it mean in terms of the structure and the river system? But the other second question that, and I remember reading this recently and not very long ago, in the context of India's development and even the equity issue, if we are to give good housing, say, to the marginalized in this country, and these are millions of people and millions of houses have to be constructed. So these resources, whether it is clay for bricks or sand for cement and construction, will perhaps be absolutely basic. And whether in the achievement of those goals of the rights of our people and equity, whether this might be a collateral that we have to kind of sacrifice. Now, the sacrifice of a collateral comes up in many contexts when we talk about development, equity, and balancing. But I was just wondering at two levels whether. So the first part is also, are you really aware of the scale of the problem at the policy level, at the national level? And how do we deal with the fact that this is needed, for example, to ensure, leave alone big projects and stuff like that, but even the basic housing for some of the people who don't have that kind of thing? Yeah, thank you.
Right. I think a very important question. First of all, I want to start with a caveat that my own study of sand and boulder mining and this thing is very limited. So I'm not in a position to answer some of the questions in terms of the numbers and stuff like that. But and I'm also really learning about this in the more recent years. So in fact, as I mentioned, the current webinar series is also very important learning. So first of all, I think this meta level analysis of sand and what is the kind of macro picture, I don't think it's available at all. And what we do have the numbers and figures, but I think they are at the level of very small panchayats and districts and places like that, because that's where the processing of the permits and others is given. And of course, a large portion now of sand extraction, boulder extraction is illegal. So by definition, there are no figures for that. So it's like, black money. By definition, there is no estimate. I mean, there can be no count of it. There can be estimates, but I don't have those estimates, but I think it's a huge thing. So the extraction amounts and all that, I think these figures are, some of the figures and estimates are there, but they are in a very disaggregated form. And I think I'm also learning about it. So as I mentioned, this current series which is going on is giving some figures in that. In fact, that series also is producing, that series has 5 webinars. So the 4 of them, each one deals with North India, West India, South India, and Northeast India. And accompanying that webinar is a report on each of these zones. So I think they have tried to put together some figures. Second thing is, yes, I think the lot of the sand is used for housing and construction. So there is this issue that if you want to provide housing for all our people, then is it inevitable? And again, I don't have the answer to that because I've not studied it, but I think it's an important question to ask. I suspect that it may not be inevitable because I think a lot of construction right now is happening without river sand. It's not the best of the options, but I think metal dust is being used as an option. So I think you can cut down the use of river sand in construction significantly, if not eliminate it entirely. So I think there are a lot of options. I think this is a similar kind of question that is being asked earlier in the case of water use, where we cannot meet our food needs unless we extract all the water in our rivers. And I think that is increasingly being shown not to be true. I suspect that's what we'll find even with the sand. But I think it's a question that probably others out there are in a much better position to answer. I myself don't have an answer to that. I suspect the answer is yes, we can meet our needs for housing without using all that sand.
Paresh?
Yes.
Thanks for that presentation, sir. This is Paresh. I'm a PhD student at Sitara. My question is an extension of Pankaj's question. Like, how do we also, because he was talking about sand, I come back to water where, say, even in a city like Bombay, you get water from all the way from 100 kilometers away where water from tribal areas, you get water and their livelihoods vis-a-vis drinking water needs of a city like Bombay are to be weighed. And how do we do that? I am, of course, there are opportunities to gain efficiency gains to be uh, efficiency gains. There are opportunities for water harvesting itself in the city of Bombay, but how do you balance these two demands? Or, and this Bombay is an example, I'm sure such examples are present across. Thank you.
Yeah, I think this is very important, and I think that it's a part and parcel of our entire kind of developmental paradigm or this thing where we have created this large urban concentrations. So we need concentrated use of resources. So at some level, I suspect that the two may be incompatible. Either you have urban, sort of highly dense population centers like that, then some of that is inevitable, getting the resources from an external source. But to what extent is that inevitable is an open question. So whether we need to get 100% of the resources of a city like Bombay from outside, or maybe only 50% or 30%, I think that is at least we can start with exploring that. I'm not sure whether we can move to a completely, a society where there are no cities. I'm not getting also into that whole realm, but I think that we can definitely start by exploring whether cities like Bombay or Pune or Delhi or others, have to get 70% or 80% or 90% of their water from outside, or it can be reduced much below that. And there, I think, apart from the mere sort of physical calculations, I think there is that equation which I talked about, where water flows in the direction not of gravity but of power. And inherently, there is an imbalance of political and economic power between such urban concentrations and their surroundings. So, and therefore, the negotiations happen where, by default, these cities claim the water of all the surrounding areas. Now, I think the only way to address is to change this political balance of power and put more negotiating power in the hands of the rural or the hinterland communities. And when that happens, then you will see the change happening. Now, that can happen through several means. For example, one of the very important things which we have been advocating, and it has again found a small space in the current legal regime, is to say that land cannot be acquired for large dams through the compulsory land acquisition acts like the Land Acquisition Act. Land acquisition has to be through consent. Once you say that, then to build for Bombay to build a dam, because right now I think for getting water for Bombay, some 7 or 8 dams are already built and are in the process of being built. If the people there have a right to say that, no, I don't want to give my land for this dam, then a whole new level of negotiation can open up. How do you obtain consent from that? That consent can possibly be obtained through a better negotiation of give and take in terms of the benefits of the project, or you offer them something in lieu of that. So I think these are the things that we need to look at. And apart from a larger, of course, planning process that is guided by a larger principle of equity, we also need to have enshrine, rights, so that this whole imbalance of political and economic power starts changing, so that equity can actually be enforced. Because ultimately equity is enforced also by, equity itself is a manifestation of a better distribution of power in the system. So, it's through all this means. I hope, some of the your points have been able to answer.
Gopal? You can unmute yourself. I think he's facing some connectivity issue. Okay, so we have the last question from the chats, and it's from Ankur. He says that how do you see the Har Ghar Jal scheme, which envisions to give piped water to each household? Can that scheme be implemented sustainably and equitably, or it can have some adverse impacts?
So I think definitely this scheme can be, if you look at this scheme in terms of the quantity of water, then I think there is no question that we can implement it sustainably and equitably. I think there is no question about it, because the quantity of water that is used for drinking water is very, very small compared to our total water resources. Whether, the more important element is the element of, how one should say, um, what's the word, water security, or is reliability. There I think we need to have a little bit better this thing. So I think we would have to use a combination of certain local resources and maybe certain longer distance or external resources. Again, that also because now in many cases we have destroyed the local water systems. Otherwise, actually, this scheme could have easily been carried out through a very decentralized, based on a very decentralized set of water resources. Right now, the plan is to do this Har Ghar Jal scheme through big dams located hundreds of kilometers away, and I think that is not really necessary. So I think this scheme is something which can easily be planned and obtained. Again, when we are talking about this in terms of water supply to say urban concentrated settlements like Bombay or Pune, then all the other issues which I talked about earlier will come. But more or less, if we are looking at it in terms of as a scheme for reaching pipe water to rural households, I think more or less there shouldn't be any difficulties. But again, you need to prioritize and ensure that the water allocation and water resources are earmarked for this scheme. That's how I would look at it.
Okay, thank you, sir. Gopal has actually typed in his question. So if I have your permission, can I ask?
Yes,
him?
of course, we can do that.
So his one of his questions is, what is your opinion of the Chikotra River project of equitable water distribution? And the second question is, so you can answer the first question and I'll go with the second one.
Okay. So I don't have the details of the Chikotra project, but if I know correctly, I think it is based on the Pani Panchayat principles, which were put out and tried to implement by Vilasrao Salunke and his whole team. And I think that those principles are very important. They are, they should form the, I think, basis for any such scheme of equitable distribution of water. And so, that's my basic stand on that. Chikotra, as I said, I don't know what the specifics of that are.
Okay, sir.
I think if that has been the thrust of the question, that's what I would like to say. I don't know if there is any other thrust to that question. If that can be articulated, I can try and answer that.
And sir, he has also asked about the sustainability to maintain agroeconomy for projects like small watershed interventions in Shirpur Pattern, Kadwanchi, and Jal Yukt Shivir, in which there is no control on the demand side, as in case of the Hiware Bazaar.
Yeah. So I think, as I mentioned, I think if we don't look at the demand side and what the water is used for, then no project or no program can be sustainable and successful. Whether it's a large dam program or whether it's a micro watershed management program, it cannot be sustainable, or a Jal Yukta Shivar program or Shirpur pattern, whatever you call it. Unless you look at the demand side and unless you look at a judicious and equitable water management, it's not sustainable. In fact, that's why some of those principles of Chikotra, or rather Pani Panchayat, become very important, of the cropping pattern, of the the Pani Panchayat talks about per capita how much water you can allocate, which is based on the existing water resource in that in that watershed or in that area. So I think these are very, very important things, and no project is sustainable unless you look at the demand side. But the demand side is not the only thing that you look at. You of course also look at the supply side. You look at the way the water is harvested. That's also important. I think some of the principles of Jaluyukta Shivar, I think it sort of was, I think, a project with good principles which went haywire because of the lopsided implementation. Maybe that's a whole different issue. We did not go into it right now. But yes, demand side and equity is absolutely central. And the cropping pattern and the water use pattern at a larger level, not just cropping pattern, but even if you use the water for industrial or commercial purposes, it has to be in alignment with the agroclimatic characteristics of that area. Yes.
So, sir, we have the last question now for the today's session.
Yes.
And it's a very interesting question, that should water be viewed as a fundamental right or socio-economic good? If you can present your views on it.
Yes. So I think the answer is both parts. I think it's again a very nuanced thing. I think definitely water should be seen as a fundamental right, but what does that fundamental right mean? What does it mean? When you say that water is a fundamental right, what does that entitle one to? So I would say that very broadly, yes, water should be seen as a fundamental right in terms of meeting the basic needs of drinking water and water for domestic use. Um, but also water for livelihoods. I think it should be a part of the fundamental rights framework. Beyond that, it should be seen as a economic and commercial use, which should be subjected to an entirely whole different framework. But I think it is also important, before we talk about, between the human, water as a fundamental right for basic human needs and the commercial needs. I think there is also the needs of the ecology, the non-human forms. I think that also should get somewhat equal weightage in that whole framework. So I think fundamental rights, water is a fundamental right. Yes, I think it should be seen as a fundamental right. But the definition of that and the manifestation and expression, I think, should be seen in a more nuanced and a more phased manner. And I think there is a lot of literature in that, around that. There is work that groups that I have been involved in have done. So I think there is a lot of literature available on that. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So now we come to the conclusion of the today's session. And on behalf of the entire Sitar family, I would like to thank you, sir, for coming in and sharing your views and insights about river and saving the water bodies that exist presently. So thanks a lot, sir. And we hope to see you soon
Thank
in
you very
physical
much
form as well.
Thank you very much also for this opportunity. And I would like to particularly emphasize that this presentation that I've made is also part of, I'm also trying to develop my own understanding and ideas around this whole issue of what is a dominant paradigm, what are the possible, alternative or different paradigms, what are the key things in it, what are the driving forces. So discussions like this are very, very important for me to develop that understanding, the kind of points which Satish has made or NC has made, Pankaj, some of the other questions which came up. I think these are very important for me. So I would like to thank you very much for, giving me this opportunity to present my thinking and for the discussion that followed. I think it's been very helpful for me. So thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Shripad. Bye.
Thank you.
See you.
Okay. Bye. Thank you.